Today we're going to talk about children's right to liberty and rights in the criminal legal system. Let's start with a few scenarios that get you thinking about some of the issues around children in the criminal legal system. If a child steals bread because they're hungry and there's no food at home, are they a criminal or are they a victim? If a parent tells their 12-year-old to deliver a bag of drugs to a neighbor, is the child a criminal or is the child a victim? Here's another example. A 10-year-old used their mom's phone to send a Snapchat message that appeared to threaten a school shooting. He was arrested and kept in detention for 10 nights. A 10-year-old. 10 nights for using their mom's phone to goof around on Snapchat. Is that a suitable consequence for a 10-year-old? And when children are detained, this has serious consequences for their other rights, such as access to needed health care, and may even make them victims of other crimes, such as abuse or sexual assault within the detention facility itself. So today we're talking about children and the criminal legal system. You might be wondering, why not call it the criminal justice system? That's the term that you often hear used when you're talking about these issues. Throughout this video, I'll try to use the term criminal legal system instead, because the system often doesn't deliver justice, just punishment. And in fact, much of the treatment of children in the system is inhumane, and it often results in lifelong consequences. If you look at the data, most people who are incarcerated will someday be released. This includes adults and children as well. And a system that really seeks justice would ensure that those individuals have the best chance possible at a good life after they're released. But the system often fails at doing that. And the system has a long history of bias against groups, particularly Black and Latino individuals, people with disabilities, people with addictions, and people with low incomes. Is that really justice? So therefore, I'll try to use the term criminal legal system in our discussion today rather than criminal justice. So let's start with some brief history. For much of history, children starting at age 7 often received the same punishment as adults and were housed in adult prisons, and there were no juvenile courts. In the 19th century, there was the beginning of a development of separate facilities for children in the criminal legal system. And then in the 20th century, early 20th century, there was a growing movement and recognition for a need for a juvenile criminal legal system, juvenile courts, and a juvenile court process. In the U.S. Supreme Court had rulings in 1967 and 1975 that expanded and grew the rights of children in the criminal legal system. So the question is, why was there a need for a juvenile criminal legal system? Well, obviously, children are different than adults. They may not understand right from wrong, given their brain development. Their brains may not understand the consequences or be able to predict the consequences of actions or that the harms their actions may produce. They also may be forced or coerced by adults to commit crimes. As in our example at the beginning of the video here, if your parent or caregiving adult has you deliver a bag of drugs to a neighbor, you likely will be compelled to do so, even though it's a crime. And is the punishment that might be suitable for an adult for something similar, would that be now cruel and unusual for a child in that situation? And similarly, punishments that might be used for adults might be cruel and unusual when applied to a child, especially things like capital punishment, which has not been shown to reduce any criminality. In addition, length incarceration, as might be common for a child facing an adult sentence, is really expensive, may not produce justice for the victim, and also makes the incarcerated person much more likely to reoffend in the future. Another reason a juvenile system is needed is that children often respond differently than adults in the investigation process itself. And young children in particular are likely to give false confessions, which could lead them to facing serious consequences for something they didn't do. So for example, they did a study here, as shown here, of kindergartners, and without much prompting by adults, 16% of the children in the class gave a false confession that they stole a toy. And with reinforcement from adults, even a larger percentage of them falsely claimed they witnessed a crime or falsely claimed they knew something about it when they actually knew nothing about it altogether. So false confessions are really a serious problem with children. They can be easily tricked or coerced into giving false confessions, which will then have lifelong consequences for them if they're convicted of a crime and face punishment for those things that they didn't actually even do. For children with developmental delays or neurodevelopment disorders, there's also serious problems with these instances as well, because they may not even understand what's going on in the criminal legal system at all. So you might be familiar with, for example, the case of Brendan Dassey, whose criminal conviction was the focus of a Netflix series 5 or 6 years ago called Making a Murderer. Brendan has a low IQ in the borderline deficiency range and has some intellectual disabilities. He gave a confession when he was confronted interviewed at school about a crime, without a lawyer or an adult advocate present, And in the interview, he said frequently that he was in a hurry to get the interview over so he could get back to his class, so he could submit this project that was due in 6th period biology class. Really had no idea of the seriousness of the interview or of the things that he was talking about, how those could have lifelong consequences for him. And even if the confession was legitimate, there's some question over whether or not the confession is legitimate. If it was legitimate, the crime itself was committed by an adult, Steve Avery, and there's some question as to whether Brendan was coerced, tricked, forced, compelled into participating in that crime. So is he really a victim and now being victimized again by the criminal legal system? Now let's take a look at what the Convention on the Rights of the Child has to say about liberty and children's rights in the criminal legal system. First of all, it talks about the notion that children have the right to have liberty. Liberty is this notion that children have the right to be free of arbitrary, unreasonable restraint, the ability to go where they want to go, the ability to do what they want to do, and includes, according to the U.S. Supreme Court, it extends to the full range of conduct which the individual is free to pursue. So without liberty, no other rights are really possible, right? So without liberty, how would a child get access to a good education, to get the nutrition they need, to the nurture and care from a family, to be protected from violence and exploitation? And how would a child with mental, physical, or developmental needs have those needs met when incarcerated or otherwise having no liberty? Article 37 of the CRC specifically prohibits torture, cruel, unusual, or degrading treatment, including prohibitions on capital punishment, and prohibitions on life imprisonment without parole for those under 18. It also prohibits unlawful or arbitrary arrest, detention, and imprisonment, and requires children in the criminal legal system be treated with humanity and respect throughout the process, and includes things like having them always separated from adults in detention facilities to make sure they're at less risk of abuse or other kinds of violations within those systems, having the right to maintain contact with their family, having prompt access to legal assistance, having the right to appear before a court and having a prompt decision from the court, and having the right to have a voice in the proceedings that affect them. Let's look at some of the data on the number of individuals involved in the criminal legal system as juveniles. In the U.S., in 2022, nearly 130,000 juvenile cases involve some kind of juvenile detention, although there's been a big decrease since 2005, as you can see here in the number of individuals detained. In Iowa, the incarceration rate for children is around 224 per 100,000, which works out to about 1,600 individuals. And if you look at the data, Black and African American youth are about 9 times more likely to be incarcerated than white youth. And data show that cases that do involve white youth are much less likely to result in a detention decision than those involving individuals from other racial groups. In Iowa, a significant number of children and youth have experience with the juvenile legal system, and most cases are resolved through diversion. Males, African American, Black youth are much more likely to experience serious consequences such as suspension, being expelled from school, receiving a complaint or allegation, or to be engaged with the juvenile legal system at all. Some key challenges in Iowa note challenges to the juvenile system in a report from 2023 included things like significant inequities across access and the way individuals are treated in the system, a need for better screening and assessment of youth, more resources to support families, more providers in key areas, particularly in mental health and behavioral health, better collaboration between child welfare and the juvenile legal system for individuals that have been removed from families or experiencing some kind of welfare access need, as well as being involved with the juvenile system, having those systems collaborate and work more closely together. Having a placement center for females, there isn't one since the primary one in the state of Iowa closed about 10 years ago. And having a better system for transferring school credit to improve the ability of children in the system to make progress in school and not have that right violated as well while they're going through the criminal legal system. Ideally, our goal would be to reduce the number of children who need to be involved in the criminal legal system. Some of the top factors with juvenile offending include, at the child level, substance use, lead exposure, and aggression. At the family level, it's things like parental substance use, physical and sexual abuse, poor parenting skills, teenage motherhood. At the school level, it's things like poor academic performance, low quality schools, poorly prepared teachers, low bonding to school. At the peer level, it's association with those who are in the system, rejection by peers, and community and neighborhood that includes lots of poverty, lots of available weapons, and exposure to violence. So therefore, some things to do to prevent juvenile crime include things like substance use prevention, clean water, lead-free homes, preventing child abuse, ensuring parents have access to daycare, parenting education, good quality schools, access to mental health care, mentoring programs, developing relationships with supportive peers, firearm prevention, and not concentrating poverty in one area. Incarceration as a strategy, it didn't show up on our list of strategies here as you see, really doesn't work as a strategy to reduce crime. One study in Illinois found that juveniles who were incarcerated were more likely to drop out of school and to be incarcerated again later in life than those who were not incarcerated. Incarceration is very expensive, and in places where for-profit detention centers operate, there's a perverse incentive to use them for incarceration as a way to earn profit for the companies that run those centers. So the goal really should be prevention and rehabilitation rather than incarceration. Another strategy that can be considered is called restorative justice. This is an alternative to incarceration that should be considered much more frequently. These programs attempt to connect victims, community members, and juvenile offenders together to try to restore and repair the harm done by the crime. There's lots of different forms of it, but it's focused on addressing the harm that was done and supporting the juvenile offender in learning and growing with the goal of preventing future harms. We can do a better job in preventing juvenile offending and at responding when these offenses occur. Children have the right to have liberty and to pursue the lives they want to live and to do the things they want to do and to just to be a child. Our reading this week is the 10-point plan for fair and effective criminal justice for children. See you in class.